My shift at the clinic ended 30 minutes ago, but Mrs. Patterson called about her mare. The horse had been limping for 3 days, and she was frantic. I drove out to her ranch, splinted the animal's front leg, and prescribed anti-inflammatory medication. It was nearly 11 when I loaded my equipment back into the truck. The drive back to town cuts through the edge of the national forest, a 40-minute stretch of winding mountain road that I'd driven 1,000 times before. My hands were tired. My shoulders ached from wrestling with a 400-pound animal, but there was satisfaction in knowing I'd helped. That was why I became a veterinarian, the pure purpose of it. I was 5 miles into the forest when I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was headlights coming toward me from around a curve, but the color was wrong. Amber, orange, growing brighter as I drove closer. My pulse quickened. I pulled off the main road onto a dirt turnoff, killed my headlights, and stepped out. The smell hit me immediately. Acrid smoke mixed with burning wood. Not a campfire. Not controlled at all. The forest fire was maybe a half-mile into the trees, visible through the gaps in the evergreens. I grabbed my phone to call the fire department, and that's when I heard it. The sound of engines, loud and racing, coming through the forest at reckless speed. Black SUVs emerged from the tree line and skidded onto the main road, kicking up gravel. 3 vehicles, moving fast, heading south toward the interstate. I stood frozen, phone in hand, watching them disappear. Something about their urgency, the violence of their departure, made my stomach clench. I finished dialing 911 and reported the fire. The dispatcher assured me help was already being coordinated. I should wait at my vehicle and stay clear of the burn area. I agreed, but I didn't get back in the truck. Not immediately. The fire was spreading in the wrong direction, toward where I'd heard those engines coming from, where there had been some kind of confrontation. Stupid. That's what I was being, stupid and reckless. But I found myself grabbing my emergency medical kit from the truck anyway. My father had been a firefighter before he died. My mother had been a nurse. I'd grown up watching them run toward disaster. It was in my blood, this compulsion to help even when it made no sense. I locked my truck and walked toward the flames. The heat intensified with each step. Smoke wrapped around me, thick and suffocating. I tied my shirt over my mouth, a futile gesture but something, and pushed deeper into the burn zone. The undergrowth crackled beneath my boots. The tops of the tallest trees glowed like torches against the darkening sky. Embers fell like demonic snow. I was searching for I didn't know what. Evidence of what those vehicles had been doing. Proof that I should have stayed in my truck. That's when I found the vehicles. 2 luxury SUVs, both shredded by gunfire. Bullet holes riddled the passenger sides. The tires were blown out. Windows hung in jagged fragments. The back doors were thrown open. I approached carefully, scanning for movement, for any sign of life. The first vehicle was empty. Blood on the seat, but no bodies. The second one was the same. There were 3 bodies, though. Not in the vehicles. I found them scattered in the debris, each one shot multiple times. Professional execution style. My medical training kicked in, the clinical part of my brain cataloging details. But my human half recoiled. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't natural disaster. This was violence. Intentional. Calculated. I should have left then. Called the authorities from a safe distance. But as I turned to go, I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. A groan. Weak, desperate. I moved toward the noise, weaving between burning brush and fallen logs. My lungs burned from the smoke. The acrid taste coated my throat. I nearly stumbled over him before I saw him. A man sprawled against the charred trunk of a massive pine, soaked in blood. His right shoulder and left side were shredded where bullets had torn through tissue and muscle. His shirt, what remained of it, was plastered to his body with blood and sweat. His skin had the waxy pallor of extreme blood loss. His eyes were closed, breathing shallow and erratic. Shock. He was in hemorrhagic shock. Every rational instinct screamed at me to turn around, to find shelter and wait for emergency services. But as I knelt beside him, I felt his pulse. Thready but present. Barely there but fighting. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching. They were an unusual shade. gray-blue, like winter water. Even through the pain and delirium clouding them, there was intelligence there. Awareness. He was looking at me without really seeing me, his lips moving around words I couldn't hear. "You're going to be okay," I told him, though I had no idea if that was true. "Don't move. I'm going to help you." I worked quickly, assessing the injuries. The shoulder wound was bad but survivable if he didn't bleed out first. The side wound was worse. The bullet had entered below his ribs, and I couldn't tell the exit trajectory. Internal damage was likely. I applied pressure with gauze from my kit, working to slow the bleeding. My hands stayed steady even as my heart hammered. This was different from animals. No fur to hide the damage, no veterinary training to guide me, just basic human anatomy and desperate hope. The fire was getting closer. Flames now licked at trees just 50 yards away. The smoke was thickening, making it harder to breathe. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't move him alone. He was easily 180 pounds of dead weight, and I weighed 130 on a good day. Dragging him wasn't possible. Or it was possible, but the math was brutal. I could stay and burn with him, or I could try to move him and likely cause catastrophic damage to his injuries in the process. I chose impossible over certain death. I fashioned a drag sling from my jacket and a fallen branch, creating a makeshift travois. My strength came from years of handling large animals, but this was different. His weight was all wrong, all awkward angles and trauma. I managed to get him onto the sling, wrapped my hands through the fabric, and pulled. The movement made him groan. A raw sound of agony. I ignored the guilt and kept pulling. 10 feet became 20. 20 became 50. My muscles screamed. My palms were raw and bleeding where the fabric cut into them. Behind us, the forest was becoming an inferno. Trees were exploding, their sap boiling inside their trunks before the wood itself ignited. The smoke was so thick now, I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. My eyes watered. I was coughing constantly, each breath a battle. But I kept moving. One step, then another, then another. The rhythm became everything. Don't think about how far. Don't think about the fire. Don't think about the weight or the pain. Just move. I remembered something my father had told me once, years before the boating accident took both him and my mother. He'd been talking about rescue operations, about what made the difference between success and failure. He'd said it wasn't about superhuman strength. It was about refusing to stop, about making the choice, moment by moment, to take the next step, that whatever you were running from couldn't catch you if you kept moving forward. I was still moving. The terrain opened up. The forest density lessened. I knew these mountains. There was a creek bed about a quarter-mile north of where we'd found him. It would be dangerous. The water would be freezing and fast-moving from snowmelt at this altitude, but fire couldn't cross water easily. I adjusted my trajectory and pulled harder. The sling caught on roots repeatedly, and I had to backtrack and find new paths. My hands were blistered now, blood mixing with dirt and sweat. Tears streamed down my face, though I couldn't tell if they were from smoke or from the overwhelm of it all. The creek appeared through the haze like an answer to prayer. I pulled him into the shallow water. It was brutal cold, the kind that steals breath, but I didn't care. The flames were closer now, maybe 30 yards behind us. I positioned him so his head was above water, but the rest of him was submerged. The cold would help slow his metabolism, reduce blood loss. Basic emergency medicine. I sat beside him in the creek, shivering despite the heat behind me, and waited for the fire to rage past. Hours blurred together. I held pressure on his wounds with my jacket, which was useless now, but I had nothing else. I talked to him constantly, narrating what was happening like he could hear me. I told him about my clinic, about the animals I treated, about my brother Tyler, who was in university studying forestry. I told him that I was not going to let him die on this mountain because dying was quitting, and I didn't quit. Around 3 a.m, the rain came. It started as a drizzle, then became a downpour. The storm broke the fire's momentum, turned the embers to ash, and finally broke my resolve. I started shaking uncontrollably. Shock, probably. Hypothermia, definitely. But he was still breathing. His pulse, while faint, was persistent. The water had washed away most of the blood, and in the darkness I could see the damage more clearly. Both bullets were still in him. The shoulder wound had stopped actively bleeding. The side wound was still oozing, but manageable. If he could survive the night, he could survive long enough to reach a hospital. When the sun came up, it painted the devastation in terrible detail. The forest was blackened and smoldering. The creek around us was stained with his blood, now a shade of diluted rust. He was still unconscious, barely clinging to life. His skin was pale, his breathing almost imperceptible, but he was alive. I'd done it. I'd actually kept him alive. That's when I heard the sirens. Emergency vehicles approaching from the south. I forced myself to stand on numb legs and walk to where the forest opened onto the main road. Fire trucks and emergency vehicles lined the highway. Firefighters in full gear were processing the burn area. And then came the others. 3 black SUVs identical to the ones that had fled hours before. They parked deliberately, blocking off the section of road nearest the water. Men in dark suits emerged from those vehicles. Not firefighters or paramedics. Something else entirely. They moved with the coordinated precision of people trained for combat. Weapons were visible beneath their jackets. They surveyed the burn zone with professional efficiency. And then they spread out, searching. They found me first. 2 of them approached, hands resting on the grips of concealed weapons. "Where is he?" one asked. No preamble. No introduction. "In the creek," I said, my voice barely recognizable from the smoke damage. "He's badly wounded. He needs medical attention immediately." The men exchanged a look. One of them spoke into a radio. "Found him. He's alive. Paramedic is with him." A pause. Then, "Copy that, boss." Within minutes, professional medical staff emerged from the forest, but they weren't wearing paramedic uniforms. They wore dark clothing and moved with military precision. They took over his care from me, and I watched as they stabilized him with efficiency that exceeded anything the standard emergency response could have provided. They had equipment I didn't recognize, medications I couldn't identify. They worked on him with the focus of people who'd done this before. "Who is he?" I asked the man who'd first approached me. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker across his face. Calculation. Assessment. "Someone very important," he finally said. "Someone very grateful, Miss Grant," I supplied. "Natalie Grant. Miss Grant, you saved his life tonight. That's going to have consequences. You need to understand that." I didn't understand. Not then. I was too exhausted, too traumatized, too covered in his blood to process what he was telling me. I watched them load him onto a transport that arrived by helicopter. I watched him disappear into the sky as dawn broke over the scorched remains of the forest. And I had no way of knowing that my life had just fundamentally shifted, that saving a stranger's life was about to tangle me into something far more dangerous than any fire. The sun was already high when I pulled into the parking lot of my clinic Monday morning. I'd spent most of Sunday giving statements to the Forest Service and the Sheriff's Department. They'd asked about the fire, the vehicles, the bodies. I'd been honest about what I'd seen, conveniently omitting the part about the men in suits and the military-style medical extraction. Some instinct, maybe self-preservation, maybe something deeper, told me to keep that information to myself. My assistant Marcus had already unlocked the clinic and started prepping the first patient. 3 dogs and a cat were scheduled for routine examinations. The morning was supposed to be normal. Blessed, boring normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw gray-blue eyes staring at me through fever and pain. By Wednesday, I was beginning to convince myself it had been some kind of hallucination, brought on by smoke inhalation and trauma. I'd saved someone. Emergency services had handled him from there. It was finished. Done. A strange chapter in my life that I would eventually process and move past. Then I noticed the SUV. It was black, unmarked, parked on the street outside my clinic. I only noticed because I was taking out the trash and caught my reflection in the office window. At first, I thought it was coincidence. There were black SUVs everywhere, but this one had been parked in the same spot for 3 days, and there were always 2 men inside. Always watching. Always present. I was putting the finishing touches on Mrs. Roxcat's vaccination record when it happened. The clinic door chimed open, and a woman walked in. She was striking, tall, severe, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back tightly enough to make her jaw look angular and dangerous. She wore a charcoal suit that screamed expensive and functional. Her dark eyes found mine immediately, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up. "Miss Grant?" she asked. Not a question, really. A confirmation. "Yes?" I set down my pen carefully, trying to read her. "Can I help you? My name is Samantha Cross. I work for Adrian Blackwell. You know that name? Adrian Blackwell. The man from the fire. The man I'd dragged through burning forest. The man those suited men had extracted with such precision." "I'm not sure what you mean," I said, but my voice wavered. Samantha didn't argue. She simply placed a business card on the counter between us. Thick cardstock. Embossed lettering. Just a phone number and a name. Adrian Cordere. Not Blackwell. Cordere. "Adrian would like to meet with you," Samantha continued, "to express his gratitude. You saved his life in that forest fire. He remembers. He doesn't forget debts. I was just doing what anyone would do." "No," Samantha said, and there was something almost respectful in her tone. "You were doing what very few people would do. Most people would have called emergency services and waited on the road. You went into an active fire zone and pulled an armed man you'd never met away from certain death." She paused. "Adrian wants to thank you properly. Tell him it's not necessary. I'm glad he survived. That's thanks enough." Samantha's expression didn't change, but she nodded slightly. She picked up the business card and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Adrian doesn't make offers twice, Miss Grant. The number on that card is how to reach him. Use it or don't, but understand that he'll make sure you're protected regardless of your choice. That's not a threat. It's just how he operates." She left before I could respond. I stood in my clinic, heart pounding, staring at the business card she'd left behind. Through the window, I watched her cross the street and get into the black SUV. It pulled away smoothly. The two men inside never looking at me, but knowing. They were always knowing. I should have thrown the card away. Should have burned it, called the police, and reported the intimidation or surveillance or whatever was happening. Instead, I put it in my pocket and tried to focus on my patients. But concentration was impossible. My mind kept spiraling. Who was Adrian Blackwell or Cordere, or whatever his real name was? What did he do that required armed extraction from a shooting scene? What did he mean about protection? That night I called my brother. Tyler was studying at the university in Eugene, about 2 hours away. We were close despite the age gap. 5 years separated us, and I'd become his guardian when our parents died during my second year of veterinary school. He was 23 now, smart and independent, but he was still my responsibility, still the person I checked on regularly. "Hey, Val," he answered on the first ring. He was one of the few people who called me Val. "What's up?" "Nothing's wrong," I said, which was a lie. "Just checking in." "You never just check in. You usually text, and I call you back 3 days later when I remember." I could hear the concern in his voice. "What happened?" I almost told him. Almost explained about the fire, the man, the SUV watching my clinic, but that would drag him into something I didn't understand myself. Just a rough week. Intense calls, long hours. You need a vacation. You've needed one for like 2 years. We talked for another 20 minutes about his classes and his research project on forest regeneration. By the time we hung up, I hadn't told him anything. Protecting him felt more important than seeking advice. Friday morning came too early. I hadn't slept properly all week. The SUV was still parked outside the clinic, and the men inside had become almost invisible to me through sheer familiarity. I was making coffee in the back room when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something, that same instinct that had made me save him in the forest, made me swipe accept. "Miss Grant." The voice was smooth, accented, with that particular quality of someone completely accustomed to control. Deep, composed. Even through the phone line, I could hear intelligence and danger in equal measure. "Yes?" This is Adrian. Blackwell is my family name. Cordar is my business name. I prefer privacy, so the distinction matters. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was explaining his coffee order. I wanted to speak with you directly. Samantha said you declined my invitation to meet. I don't know you. I don't know what you do. I don't know what meeting with you would involve. That's fair. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, steady and patient. Let me explain something. Those vehicles in the forest, that shooting, that was an attempt on my life. I was supposed to die that night. You prevented that. In my world, that creates a debt. Debts are taken very seriously. I just helped someone who needed it. I know. You're not a criminal. You're not looking for reward or protection or entry into the underworld. You saved me because that's who you are. Samantha confirmed this. She's rarely wrong about people. I didn't know what to say. There was something almost gentle in his voice despite the content of what he was saying. Here's what happens next, Adrian continued. You might have noticed security outside your clinic. They're there to ensure you're protected. While you brought me from the fire, you were seen. People who wanted me dead know you exist now. That makes you a target, a liability for them, or leverage. Ice filled my veins. Are you threatening me? No. I'm warning you. And offering protection. Not in a controlling way. Just surveillance. Security. Until I eliminate the threat. After that, you'll never hear from me again. But right now, you need to understand that saving me has consequences. What if I don't want your protection? Then I'll provide it anyway. The only difference is whether you accept help willingly or whether you resist. The protection happens regardless. I'd prefer your cooperation, but I'm not going to let someone I owe my life to get harmed because of that debt. Something in his tone, not threatening, just absolute, told me he meant every word. There was no point arguing. How long? I asked quietly. Until he's no longer a threat. Days, maybe weeks. Depends on logistics. And then what? Then you go back to your normal life. Your brother returns to university without security. Your clinic operates without oversight. You forget this happened. You forget me. I didn't believe that last part. I didn't think I could forget someone whose blood had been on my hands, whose life I'd fought to preserve in the dark. I need to think about this. You don't. But I understand the impulse to feel like you have a choice. His voice wasn't unkind. You do have choices, Miss Grant. You can cooperate fully. You can cooperate minimally. You can refuse and make this harder than it needs to be. But what won't change is that I'm keeping you safe. That was decided the moment you pulled me from that fire. After we hung up, I sat in the back room of my clinic for a long time. The coffee went cold. My first appointment would arrive in 10 minutes. And somewhere out there, a man I'd saved was keeping promises I'd never asked him to make. By that evening, I'd made a decision. I called the number on the card Samantha had left. Yes? Adrian answered immediately, like he'd been expecting my call. I want to meet you, I said, to understand what this is, what you are, what I've gotten myself into. Wise choice. There's a restaurant in Portland, Osteria Luna, tomorrow at 7. I'll send a car for you. I'll drive myself. Even better. Gives you an exit strategy if you need it. There was something almost like approval in his tone. Natalie. I can call you Natalie? Yes. Thank you. For what you did. For saving me. For being brave enough to walk into fire for a stranger. He paused. I intend to spend considerable effort ensuring you don't regret that choice. Before I could respond, he disconnected. I looked out the clinic window at the black SUV, still parked on the street, still waiting. Tomorrow I would meet Adrian Blackwell or Cordere or whatever his name truly was. Tomorrow I would try to understand how one night in a burning forest had changed everything. But tonight, I sat alone in my clinic and tried to remember what normal felt like. Osteria Luna sat tucked on a side street in Portland's Old Town, the kind of place that locals knew but tourists rarely found. Ivy climbed the brick facade, and warm light glowed through windows lined with lace curtains. It looked like something from a European postcard, authentic and timeless. I pulled my truck into the parking lot at 6:55, deliberately arriving early enough to scout the place, late enough that I wouldn't seem overeager. The front door was locked. I knocked, and a man in a dark suit opened it immediately. He wasn't the same one from the forest, but he was cut from identical cloth. Professional. Armed. He nodded once and stepped aside to let me pass. The restaurant was closed. Tables had been cleared and stacked against walls, chairs removed. Only one table remained in the center of the dining room, set for two. A single candle flickered between the place settings. It was intimate and calculated in equal measure. Someone had gone to considerable effort to create an environment of privacy. Adrian stood as I entered. I recognized him immediately, even cleaned up and dressed instead of covered in blood and forest debris. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, and moved with the controlled grace of someone trained in violence. His suit was black, expensive without being ostentatious. His hair was combed back from his face, revealing features that were sharp and aristocratic. That gray-blue gaze found mine, and I felt something shift in my chest that I refused to name. "Natalie," he said, my name sounding like a sentence in a language I didn't speak. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I should," I admitted, staying near the door. "But you did." He gestured to the table. "Sit. Let's talk." I crossed the room and took the chair opposite him. He'd positioned himself so he could see both the front entrance and the back exits. A man used to planning escapes. A waiter appeared from nowhere with wine I hadn't ordered, pouring with practiced efficiency before disappearing again. "Tell me about yourself," Adrian said, not as a command but as genuine curiosity. "Beyond the forest. Who is Natalie Grant?" I wasn't prepared for the question. I'd expected threats or demands or explanations. Not interest. "I'm a veterinarian. I grew up in Oregon, went to Oregon State for my degree. Practiced in Portland for a few years, before moving back to my hometown to open a small clinic. I picked up my wine glass. That's it. You're leaving out the important parts. You were a guardian to your brother starting at what age? 22? My hands went rigid around the wine glass. "How do you know that?" "I told you. I have resources. I know you lost your parents 7 years ago in a boating accident on the Pacific. I know you put yourself through veterinary school while raising a teenager. I know you send money monthly to your grandmother in a care facility in Baltimore, even though you have significant student loan debt. I know you work 60-hour weeks, you rarely take days off, and you treat animals regardless of whether the owners can pay. The invasion of privacy should have terrified me. Instead, I felt oddly exposed, seen. Why? Because I wanted to understand who would pull a man she'd never met from a burning forest without hesitation. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying me. Most people calculate risk. They think about personal safety first. You didn't. You thought about responsibility, about someone needing help. So you invaded my privacy to determine if I was virtuous. I invaded your privacy to determine if you were a threat or a genuine person with a specific code of ethics. You're neither threat nor liability. That's rare in my world. A server appeared with food. Pasta primavera for me, seafood risotto for him. I hadn't ordered. Adrian must have arranged everything in advance, controlled every variable of the evening. I should have found it manipulative. Instead, I recognized it as strategy. He was someone accustomed to orchestrating circumstances rather than simply responding to them. "What exactly is your world?" I asked, eating because ignoring the food felt like rejection. "Import and export, real estate development, restaurants." He paused. "Some of my business operates outside the bounds of legal frameworks." That's a diplomatic way of saying you're a criminal. I prefer businessman, but yes, technically. He didn't seem bothered by the characterization. I inherited a family operation that had existed for 3 generations. Taking it over meant I could either let it collapse into chaos or maintain it. I chose to maintain it. I've added legitimate enterprises to balance the equation, but the core of my business is rooted in activities that law enforcement frowns upon. And those men in the forest? Russian syndicate. They want my territory on the West Coast. Specifically, they want my control of the Port of Seattle. Shipping containers come through there daily. What's inside them determines everything. He took a bite of risotto. They tried to eliminate me 3 nights ago. They failed. Because I happened to be there. You were there, yes. But I survived because you refused to leave me in that fire. He set down his fork. That creates what my family calls a vendetta. Not a blood debt exactly, but something equivalent. A life for a life. I owe you more than currency can represent. I don't want anything from you. I know. That's why I trust you. His eyes held mine. Most people want something. They see opportunity and calculate how to exploit it. You saved me and then tried to disappear. You didn't ask for money or protection or favor. You simply did what you believed was right. So what happens now? Now you understand your situation. Those Russian operatives know you exist. They have surveillance footage of you pulling me from that fire. To them, you're either leverage against me or collateral damage. Both are problems I need to solve. By providing security, by ensuring you're never in a position where they can reach you. He picked up his wine. Your brother will have security starting tomorrow. Your clinic will have additional insurance. Your financial situation will improve substantially through some business investments I'm making in the area. And if anything goes wrong, if anyone approaches you with intentions toward extraction or coercion, you'll have armed protection immediately available. This is a cage. You're building a cage around me. No, he said quietly. I'm building a moat. There's a difference. You're free within those walls. You'll run your clinic. You'll see your brother. You'll live your life. But external threats won't breach the perimeter. I should have refused. Should have told him to remove his security detail and leave me alone. But Tyler was at university, vulnerable to the same targeting. And Adrian was right that people who wanted me dead knew I existed. Refusing protection didn't eliminate the threat. It just made me foolish. How long? I asked. Until I've eliminated Viktor Volkov and neutralized his immediate successors. 3 months, maybe longer. Depends on logistics and his level of paranoia. And then you'll never see me again. I'll withdraw protection and fade from your life like a fever dream. I didn't believe that. Somehow I understood that Adrian Blackwell wasn't someone who exited your life cleanly. You either removed him with violence, or he consumed you entirely. There was no middle ground. The server cleared our plates and brought dessert. Panna cotta with berry compote. Adrian watched me eat, and the intensity of his gaze made the simple action feel significant somehow. Every gesture was being catalogued and analyzed. Why are you doing this? I asked finally. Really? Because I can. Because I want to. Because I spent 4 days in a recovery facility thinking about the fact that you risked your life for mine without knowing who I was or what I did. Most people wouldn't. Most people would have called authorities and walked away. He leaned forward slightly. You didn't. So now I'm obligated to prove that your faith in my survival was justified. Faith is a weird word for desperate improvisation. Perhaps. But you could have stayed safe. You chose to help anyway. His voice dropped lower. That choice deserves to be honored. When he drove me back to my truck an hour later, insisting on accompanying me, though I argued against it, there was a moment at the driver's side door where the air between us seemed to crystallize. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers barely brushing my skin. I'll be careful, he said. With you. With what I'm asking you to trust me with. That's a promise. The drive home was spent replaying the evening. Adrian Blackwell was exactly what I'd feared, and nothing like I'd expected simultaneously. He was dangerous, yes, but not to me. He was a threat contained and directed toward external enemies. And somehow, impossibly, I believed him when he said he'd be careful with the fragile thing developing between us. By the following Monday, the changes he'd set in motion were visible. My clinic received offers from medical supply companies with drastically improved pricing. A loan I'd been pending for 6 months, suddenly approved with terms so favorable they seemed surreal. Tyler mentioned that a security consultant had approached him about installing systems in his apartment off campus. Nothing was overt. Everything was orchestrated with surgical precision. I was being wrapped in Adrian Blackwell's protection like an insect in a web. But unlike insects in webs, I'd made the conscious decision to allow it. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for everything to spiral into chaos. 3 weeks of Adrian calling me daily, of stolen moments between his business obligations and my clinic schedule. 3 weeks of growing intimacy that contradicted every rational part of my brain, screaming that this was dangerous. And then the war escalated. I first noticed something was wrong when Sam arrived at my clinic on a Tuesday afternoon. She didn't knock, just walked in during my lunch break and found me in the back office eating a sad sandwich and reviewing patient records. Her expression was grim. "We need to move you and Tyler," she said without preamble. "Move us where?" "Adrian has a property in the mountains. Secure location. You'll stay there until the situation stabilizes." "Absolutely not." I set down my sandwich. "I have patients scheduled. I have a business to run. I'm not abandoning my life because of some territorial war between criminals. The Russians know about Tyler." Sam's voice was flat, clinical. "They've been watching his apartment for 6 days. We've been monitoring their surveillance, and they're planning to use him as leverage. Moving him is non-negotiable." The words hit like a physical blow. My brother. They were targeting my brother. All the protection Adrian had offered suddenly became necessary rather than suffocating. "Okay," I said quietly. "Okay. But I'm telling Tyler myself." Calling my brother was one of the harder things I've done. He was terrified, angry, and confused in equal measure. But when I explained that people connected to Adrian wanted to use him as a bargaining chip, he understood. Tyler wasn't naive. He knew that living with a sister connected to a crime boss came with consequences. By that evening, we were being transported to Adrian's mountain property. It was a fortress disguised as a home. Stone and glass nestled into the forest, surrounded by walls that looked more suited to a military installation than a residence. Guards in discreet positions around the perimeter. Security cameras at every angle. Armed men stationed at the gates. Sam coordinated our arrival, showing us to a private suite on the east wing. 2 bedrooms. A shared living area. Ensuite bathrooms. Luxury that would have felt like imprisonment if I wasn't so terrified for Tyler's safety. "You'll have everything you need," Sam explained. "Kitchen access, entertainment systems, secure internet. If you need anything, use the intercom." After she left, Tyler collapsed onto one of the sofas. "This is insane. This is legitimately insane. Val, what have you gotten us into? I saved someone's life, and now we're safe because of it." Even to my own ears, the logic sounded thin. We're not safe. We're hostages. That's different. He wasn't entirely wrong. The suite was comfortable, but it was still a cage. I could feel the weight of Adrian's control in every room, every service offered, every security measure. He'd warned me he was building a moat, but what I hadn't understood was that moats kept things in as effectively as they kept things out. Adrian appeared that evening. I was in the shared sitting area alone, Tyler having retreated to his bedroom to call his study group and pretend normalcy. Adrian looked exhausted. There was tension in his jaw, and his eyes were shadowed from lack of sleep. He'd been running on adrenaline and determination. "I'm sorry about this," he said without preamble. "I tried to keep them from targeting your brother. I failed. How did this happen? You have all this security, all this information. How did they get close enough to learn about Tyler? Because I made a mistake." He sat on the edge of the sofa, maintaining distance. "I underestimated Volkov's reach. He has people inside my organization feeding him information. Someone leaked details about you and Tyler, about the fact that you matter to me." The way he said that last part, like it was obvious. Like everyone should know that I'd become essential to him in the span of 3 weeks. "What now?" I asked. "Now I end this. I've located Volkov's primary operations center. We're moving against him in the next 48 hours. After that, the threat to you and Tyler is neutralized. By moving against him, you mean killing him." Adrian didn't deny it. "Yes. And if something goes wrong, then nothing I promise you will matter anyway." He finally looked at me directly. "I'm not going to lie to you, Natalie. This is dangerous. People will die. Some of them might be people I employ. But I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that Volkov doesn't live past this week." The determination in his voice was absolute. This was Adrian in his element, stripped of civility and charm. This was the predator that civilized conversation normally concealed. "Stay with Tyler tonight," I said. "Please. He needs to know you're taking this seriously, that we're not just casualties in your war." Adrian nodded and went to find my brother. I watched them through the open doorway as he sat with Tyler in his bedroom, explaining the situation with brutal honesty. I saw my brother's fear gradually transform into something else. Not acceptance exactly, but understanding. Adrian treated Tyler like an adult capable of handling truth, and Tyler responded by rising to meet that standard. By the next morning, everything had changed. Adrian was gone, called away to coordinate his operation. Sam remained at the property but spent most of her time on encrypted calls, coordinating movements I didn't understand. The news coverage was vague. There had been some kind of incident in Seattle, but details were sparse. Police were investigating. Casualties had occurred. I spent the day with Tyler, playing cards and watching movies in the sitting area. We pretended the guards weren't positioned outside and that the world wasn't violent and chaotic just beyond our walls. By evening, the waiting became unbearable. When Adrian returned, it was after midnight. I was still awake, having abandoned pretense of sleep hours ago. He came to the suite directly, and the sight of him made my breath catch. Blood wasn't visible on his clothes, but I could smell it anyway, metallic and wrong. His knuckles were scraped. His left eye was bruised, but he was alive, and that was the only thing that mattered. "It's done," he said quietly. "Volkov and his primary lieutenants. They're eliminated. The immediate threat to you is over." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something far more complex. He'd done this for me, crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, spilled blood in my name. "I need to shower," Adrian said. "I can't." He gestured vaguely at himself. "Not like this." I followed him to his quarters, which were on the opposite side of the property from mine and Tyler's suite. His bedroom was Spartan and immaculate. A king bed, minimal furniture, abstract art on the walls. Nothing personal. Nothing that revealed who he was when no one was watching. I waited while he showered. When he emerged, he was cleaner, but not less dangerous. Just more human. More vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with physical wounds. "I did horrible things tonight," he said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Things that will require confession and restitution if my soul still exists for judgment. You protected us. I slaughtered people to maintain my territory and eliminate threats." He looked at me with those gray-blue eyes that had become familiar now. "Don't try to romanticize it, Natalie. Don't convince yourself that what I did was noble or justified. It was necessary and ruthless." I sat beside him. "I'm not romanticizing it. I'm accepting it. There's a difference." He took my hand carefully, like I might disappear if he gripped too firmly. "You deserve someone better. Someone who doesn't do the things I do. Someone clean." "I don't want someone clean." The words came from somewhere honest inside me. "I want someone real. Someone who doesn't pretend to be better than he is. You saved my brother's life tonight. You protected us because I matter to you. That's real. That's human. That's enough." Adrian pulled me toward him, and I let him. He kissed me carefully, like he was afraid of contaminating me with the violence still clinging to his skin. But I kissed back with urgency, with the desperate need to remind both of us that he was alive, and I was grateful. The next morning, Sam arranged for Tyler and me to return to my clinic. The security would remain, but become less visible. Volkov's organization was in disarray, successor wars already beginning. The immediate crisis had passed. Adrian had kept his promise. The threat was eliminated. Driving back to town, Tyler was quieter than usual. When I finally asked what he was thinking, he took a long time to answer. "I think he genuinely cares about you," Tyler said finally. "Not as leverage or obligation. I think you matter to him in a way that scares him. It scares me too." "Yeah, I can tell." Tyler looked out the window at the forest passing by. "Be careful, Val. People like him don't do relationships the way normal people do. They consume them. They turn them into territory to be held and defended." I knew he was right, but I also knew that Adrian had already marked me as his territory, and I was beginning to understand that I wanted to be marked, that the safety he offered came with the price of his complete possession, and I was willing to pay it. The weeks following Volkov's death were a study in controlled chaos. Adrian moved through the aftermath of his victory like a general consolidating conquered territory. His lawyers worked around the clock cleaning up loose ends. Accountants ensured that no financial threads connected back to him. Men in suits conducted quiet business meetings that I pretended not to notice when they occurred at his estate. But something had shifted in him. I noticed it gradually, then all at once. Adrian became distant, professional. He still called, but the conversations were shorter. When we were together, there was a formality that hadn't existed before. He was polite in a way that felt like rejection dressed in courtesy. The man who'd held me close after returning, bloodied from his war, had been replaced by someone who maintained careful distance. 2 months after Volkov's death, Adrian took me to dinner at a private restaurant in Seattle. The setting was perfect. Candlelight, wine, the kind of attention to detail that screamed romantic gesture. But he spent the meal discussing business investments and security protocols. He talked about my clinic's expansion like it was a real estate transaction. He mentioned Tyler's university performance like he was assessing an asset. I finally set down my fork. Stop. Adrian looked up from his entree. Stop what? Whatever this is. This performance. You're sitting across from me like you're conducting a hostile board meeting. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. I'm trying to maintain appropriate boundaries. Boundaries? Adrian, you've had armed security surrounding me for months. You've infiltrated every aspect of my life. And now you're pretending we don't know each other? I'm protecting you from my world. He set down his own fork. I made mistakes. I let myself become too involved with you. Let you see too much of who I really am. That was selfish. You deserve someone who doesn't operate in shadows and violence. Stop deciding what I deserve. Anger was rising in my chest now. I'm 28 years old. I've raised my brother. I've survived loss. I can make my own choices about what I want. And right now, I want you to stop running away from whatever this is between us. Adrian's jaw tightened. What this is will destroy you. It's already started. You're becoming collateral in my world, instead of staying separate from it. I've been part of your world since the moment you promised to call me queen at dawn in that forest. You don't get to rewrite that now that it's inconvenient. He stood abruptly. I need air. I followed him out of the restaurant into the Seattle night. The city spread below us, lights reflecting off the sound. Adrian gripped the railing of the balcony hard enough that I worried he'd bend the metal. I ordered people killed, he said quietly, to protect you and your brother. Ordered their deaths like it was nothing. And you looked at me afterward and said it was acceptable. That I was acceptable. He turned to face me. That terrifies me, Natalie. The fact that you can accept that part of me terrifies me more than any enemy ever could. Because you're falling in love with me. And you think it means you're not who you thought you were. His expression shifted. Something raw and vulnerable flickered across his face before he controlled it. I can't give you a normal life. I don't want a normal life. Normal is boring. Normal is working 60 hours a week in a clinic and coming home to an empty apartment. Normal is wondering if there's something more. I've seen the more. It's you. Adrian reached out and cupped my face between his palms. If you stay with me, you'll be marked as mine. Openly. Every rival, every enemy, every person who wants leverage against me will see you as a target. I already am a target. At least with you, I'm a protected target. He kissed me then, and it was different from the careful kisses in his bedroom after the violence. This was desperate and consuming and absolutely genuine. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I'm terrified of destroying you, he whispered. Then don't. Choose not to. Every day, choose to be better than the version of yourself that sees me as collateral. Sam called Adrian an hour later. I could only hear his side of the conversation, but I gathered there was an issue with one of the businesses. A property dispute in Portland. Nothing immediately threatening, but something requiring his attention. He listened, asked questions, then disconnected. I have to go handle something, he said. A business complication. It'll take most of the night. Okay. Will you stay at the house tonight? I'd rather know you're secure than wondering if you drove back to town alone. I agreed, and he arranged transportation. His Seattle residence was even more impressive than his mountain property. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. Modern and minimalist, with security integrated so seamlessly it was almost invisible. Sam was waiting when I arrived, and she greeted me with the familiarity of someone who'd become almost a friend over the past months. "Boss won't be back until late," she informed me. "I've arranged for dinner to be prepared in the kitchen if you're hungry." I wasn't, but I ate anyway. Afterward, I wandered the house, familiarizing myself with the space. Adrian's bedroom was on the top floor, a masterpiece of privacy overlooking the sound. I found myself standing in his walk-in closet, running my fingers over expensive fabrics. Suits and shirts and ties, everything organized with military precision. No personal photographs or mementos, just the professional wardrobe of a man who compartmentalized his life ruthlessly. On his nightstand was a single photograph. It was tucked beneath a book on business strategy, and I almost missed it. It was taken from a distance, slightly blurred. Me at my clinic, holding a cat while a client looked on. I was laughing at something, head tilted back, completely unaware of being observed. Someone had taken this photograph, and Adrian had kept it. He came home around 3 a.m. I was asleep in his bed, having eventually surrendered to exhaustion. I woke to the sound of him entering the bedroom. In the darkness, I could make out his silhouette. He was checking his phone, reading something with intense focus. "Everything okay?" I asked sleepily. He set down the phone. "Everything's fine. Just business complications that required personal attention." Sam mentioned Portland. "A property dispute. Nothing serious." He began removing his clothes, and I watched him cross to the bathroom to shower. When he returned, he slid into bed beside me and pulled me against his chest. His heart was racing. "Tell me the truth," I said quietly. Adrian was silent for a long moment. "One of my associates made a decision about expanding operations without consulting me. It was the wrong decision, one that could have attracted attention I don't need. I had to address it. Did you hurt him?" "No. I reassigned him and made it clear that independent action would not be tolerated again." I accepted that explanation, though I suspected there was more to the story. But Adrian had promised to be careful, and I had to trust that he meant it. I shifted to face him, kissing him gently. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Whatever scares you about this, whatever made you try to push me away in that restaurant, I'm not going anywhere." He kissed me back, and there was gratitude in it, relief. The beginning of acceptance that maybe we could make this work, despite everything telling us we shouldn't. Over the following weeks, Adrian slowly reintegrated into my life, rather than keeping me compartmentalized. He attended events at my clinic. He had dinner with Tyler, and they developed an unexpected rapport based on mutual respect. He introduced me to his legitimate business operations, showing me how the profits from legal enterprises helped obscure the sources of money from less savory endeavors. But there remained areas of his life that he kept cordoned off. Meetings he wouldn't discuss. Operations he refused to explain. I learned not to ask questions about those things. Instead, I focused on the Adrian who existed in the spaces between his obligations. The Adrian who could be tender and uncertain and human. It was during a quiet evening at my apartment that he broached the subject directly. We were lying in bed, the city lights visible through my bedroom window. He was tracing patterns on my arm absently, lost in thought. "I want to introduce you to people," he said, "officially, as someone important in my life. Not hidden, not compartmentalized, open." My heart accelerated. "What does that mean?" "It means acknowledging that you're mine and I'm yours. It means giving anyone who might question that status a very clear answer. Are you asking me something?" He shifted to face me. In the dim light, his eyes were almost black. "I'm telling you that I'm considering it, that I want to ask you something, but I'm still afraid I'll destroy you in the process." I reached up and touched his face. "Then we'll figure out destruction together. But stop assuming you already know how this ends." Adrian leaned down and kissed me with all the intensity he'd been holding back. And for the first time since that forest fire, I felt like we were both finally on the same side. 6 months had passed since that night in Seattle, when Adrian first mentioned the possibility of claiming me openly. 6 months of building something real in the spaces between his obligations and my clinic commitments. 6 months of Tyler gradually accepting that his sister had chosen a path that defied conventional logic, and 6 months of Adrian slowly reshaping his world to accommodate the presence of someone who loved him despite everything he was. The proposal came on a day that seemed deliberately chosen to echo our beginning. We drove back to the forest where I'd found him bleeding and broken. The burn zone had recovered with remarkable speed. New growth emerged through blackened soil. Young trees reached toward sky that had forgotten the smoke. Life had reclaimed what fire had taken, and nature had rewritten the story. Adrian parked away from the main road. We walked through the forest together, his hand holding mine with the certainty of someone who'd stopped questioning whether he deserved this. When we reached the creek where I'd spent that endless night keeping him alive, he stopped. "I've been thinking about what you said," Adrian began, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability. "About me not assuming I know how this ends. About us figuring out destruction together if necessary." "Okay," I said carefully, aware that something significant was happening. He released my hand and dropped to one knee on the rocks beside the creek. From his jacket he withdrew a small box. The ring inside was understated elegance, a single diamond set in platinum. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed ownership or possession, just something real and honest. "I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you did for me that night," Adrian said. "I want to wake up next to you knowing that you chose me despite everything you know about me. I want to build something that lasts, not something that burns away like that fire. Natalie, will you marry me?" The yes came before I could think about it. Yes to the man I'd dragged from burning forest. Yes to the predator who'd learned to be gentle for me. Yes to the future we were building despite the world telling us it was impossible. When he stood and kissed me, it tasted like promises and beginnings. The wedding happened 5 months later. It was small, but deliberate. Tyler walked me down the aisle in an intimate ceremony attended by people who mattered. Sam stood as Adrian's witness, her usual severity softened by genuine affection. Adrian's legal team and business associates were present, but so were my clinic staff and friends. A blending of worlds that 6 months ago would have seemed impossible. Adrian waited at the altar in a tailored black suit, looking every bit the dangerous man I'd come to love. But when his eyes found mine, all that danger melted into something tender and reverent. He took my hands like I might disappear if he didn't hold carefully. The vows were traditional, but carried weight beyond the words. When Adrian promised to honor and cherish me, there was absolute certainty in his voice. When I promised to stand beside him through whatever came, it was a vow I intended to keep despite knowing the complications it would bring. By the time we exchanged rings, I was crying. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that somehow, impossibly, we'd made it here. Through violence and danger, and the fundamental incompatibility of our worlds, we'd found each other and decided to stay. The first year of marriage was learning to coexist in Adrian's carefully compartmentalized life. I continued running my clinic, but now with the security of Adrian's financial backing. I expanded operations and opened a sanctuary for rescued animals on the property adjacent to the clinic. Adrian began divesting from his more questionable enterprises, redirecting income through legitimate channels. It was a gradual transformation, not a complete reformation, but it was progress born from genuine effort. Tyler finished his forestry degree and began working in conservation. He maintained his relationship with both Adrian and me, having developed genuine respect for the man my husband had proven himself to be. Sam became something like a friend, checking in on me regularly and offering advice when navigating the complexities of being married to someone who operated in shadows. There were hard days. Days when Adrian came home carrying the weight of decisions that required him to be the predator rather than the man I'd married. Days when I worried that I was losing him to his empire, that the darkness would eventually consume the light he'd found with me. Days when Adrian pushed me away, convinced that I'd be better off without him. But there were also days of unexpected tenderness. Days when he'd leave his office midday to have lunch with me. Days when he'd sit in the waiting room of my clinic watching me work. And the fierce pride in his eyes reminded me why I'd chosen this complicated man over every simpler option life had offered. One evening, almost a year after our wedding, we returned to the forest. Not out of necessity this time, but by choice. We brought a picnic and sat by the creek where he'd proposed. Adrian pointed out how much the forest had changed since that fire. New trees had grown tall enough to create canopy. Wildlife had returned. The blackened scars had faded beneath layers of recovery. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, pulling me from that fire that night. I considered the question seriously. No, even knowing everything that came after, even the hard parts. I don't regret it. I've done terrible things since then. Things that haven't been washed away just because I love you. I know. I accepted that when I chose you at the restaurant and again when I said yes to your proposal. I'm not redeeming you, Adrian. I'm not saving you or fixing you. I'm just loving you as you are, darkness included. He reached over and took my hand, and we sat in comfortable silence as the forest grew quiet around us. There was no dramatic ending, no grand gesture of transformation, just two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and decided that whatever came next was worth fighting for. Years later, when people asked how we met, I had a simple answer. I found him in a forest fire and decided he was worth saving. Adrian's version was more honest. He said that I'd given him a second chance at life, and he'd spent every day since trying to prove worthy of that gift. The truth was somewhere in between. We'd saved each other, not dramatically or perfectly, but genuinely. I'd given him the will to survive. He'd given me permission to be brave enough to claim the life I actually wanted instead of settling for comfort and predictability. Together, we'd built something that shouldn't have worked but did. The sanctuary I opened grew beyond my initial vision. It became a retreat for animals too damaged to function in normal environments, and it attracted funding from Adrian's legitimate businesses. Tyler occasionally consulted on forest restoration projects for the property, and Adrian, against all odds, became involved in philanthropic work that genuinely interested him. Our marriage wasn't a fairy tale. There were still nights when Adrian had to do things he wouldn't tell me about. There were still moments when I questioned whether I'd made the right choice. There were still dangers lurking on the periphery of our lives, remnants of Adrian's criminal past finding ways to complicate our present. But every morning, Adrian looked at me like I was the most precious thing he owned. And every day, I chose him. Not because I had to, not because I was trapped, but because despite everything telling me it was wrong, it was right. He was right. We were right. In all the complicated, messy, imperfect ways that real love often is. When people saw us together, they saw contrast. A man built for violence and a woman built for healing. An empire constructed on shadows and a life built on light. But we understood the truth. We weren't opposites trying to balance each other. We were reflections, each showing the other what was possible if you were brave enough to choose differently. Standing in that forest where everything had begun, surrounded by evidence of survival and recovery, I understood that we'd both been burning before we met. He'd been burning from the violence of his world. I'd been burning from the isolation of my responsibilities. We'd found each other in the flames and decided that together we might survive the heat. He called me his queen that first morning at dawn in the creek. And years later, I finally understood what he meant. Not a queen who ruled over others or who was elevated above everyone, but a queen who stood beside her king as equal partner, who challenged him when he needed challenging, who loved him despite knowing exactly who he was. A queen who reigned not through submission, but through strength, choice, and unwavering commitment. And Adrian, the Mafia boss I'd dragged through fire, had become the man I'd drag through fire again if necessary. Not to save him, but because saving him had saved me.